All right, friends, we're going to go ahead and get started with our closing session, rounding out a great weekend here in College Station at Texas A&M, Texas Cannabis Policy Conference. If everyone wants to grab their seat, come on in close if you like. Get cozy, close to the stage, grab a seat. We'll go ahead and get started. I want to, I've mentioned it a couple times, but it can't be said enough how important it is to have strong support systems and to have teams that can effectively accomplish projects. And we have not only with this event, which I just have to say thank you again to Lisa Sewell, who has been so instrumental in executing this event. Amanda Hughes helped to organize and execute the silent auction, which I think is still open, so go check that out. Stacy, is Stacy here? Stacy Fowler. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and thank her anyway still, even though she's gone. She is a Texas A&M student, and I met her through her father, who was advocating for her. She has Tourette syndrome. Cannabis has changed her entire life so that she has been able to not only participate and to feel confident going in public, but to be able to come to school at Texas A&M and to thrive. And for her to be so bold to be advocating for herself and for others, we're very proud of Stacy, and here she is here. Where is she? Their family's here. Yes, that's Greg. That's her mom, dad, and sister, and we're all so grateful for Stacy and really proud of everything that she's accomplished. Glad to have her on the team. Two of our organizing team members were not able to make it today. Hillary is in Louisiana going to law school and wasn't able to make it, but she has been just so critical in our ability to execute this event. So thank you, Hillary. And Trish Taylor. Trish is a longtime advocate for reform, and she serves on the board of Texans for Responsible Marijuana Policy alongside myself and John Baucum. She helped us keep the website up to date and has done just a tremendous job of helping. So thank you, Trish, for all of your support. And of course, in addition to our team and the speakers who came out, our sponsors were critical to making this happen. You cannot host events like this without people contributing in meaningful ways as sponsors. And I'm grateful for all of our sponsors, but especially our premier and platinum sponsors. The Trichome Institute, Foundation for an Informed Texas has been a platinum sponsor. The Texas Cannabis Clinic, most of us just heard from Dr. Brimberry. Thank you for sponsoring Dr. Pharmacan, who we heard from at lunch. American Cultivation Systems, Lindsay, Josh, there you are. They're based in Houston and do lighting systems. Thank you so much, Orange Photonics and Davis Farms, for all supporting. And of course, our big premier sponsors, Texas A&M Soil and Crop Department, making it possible for us to host this event here at A&M. Keep up the great work that you're doing with Rare Earth Genomics. This is the project that is helping to identify genetics that are going to offer farmers a future in cannabis that they choose, different levels of THC, biggest and best crops that they can possibly have. And with that, I want to offer Mason Berry an opportunity to say a few words.
Hey, everybody. Great. What I wanted to say is pretty much support your advocates. So for years, it's been a real uphill battle, and it feels as though the tide is changing. And one thing that we really appreciate about that is that, bigotry, ignorance, and lies become obsolete very quickly. And anybody that has experienced the truth of this plant knows that it heals the soil and it heals the soul. And so I'm very thankful to the advocates and the organizers that have spread the truth and made these events possible and made them better every single time. The second group that I would like you to support is your veterans. And I can't speak enough that in Texas, more so than any state, we have the highest volume of veterans. And that is the linchpin, not just in Texas, but in the entire national movement. And our veterans and our advocates are some of the most passionate and educated and tireless workers for this plant. So the last folks that I would really like to thank are Texas A&M, AgriLife, Soil and Crop Sciences. We appreciate their leadership. We appreciate the ability to even have this event at all. And it really signifies a change, we think, in the trend of Texas politics, bringing academia and science and so many incredible sponsors, operators, and cultivators and breeders and laboratory technicians, all of our panels across this entire weekend were just first rate. It felt like MJ BizCon, but for 200 people. So with that being said, support your advocates, support your vets. Love you guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Mason. Thank you for your support for this weekend and all the support that you've offered us as advocates. Okay, I'm going to join my friends and colleagues here. John Baucum, I think most of us heard from him this weekend. Republicans against marijuana prohibition. He also again serves on the board of the coalition. Jack Finkel, friend, colleague, advocate extraordinaire.
It's James now.
Jax James. Wow.
Jax James. I know it's hard. It's hard.
Thank you. This is Jax James, my friend and colleague. She's the executive director of the Foundation for an Informed Texas and Texas Normal, which are sister organizations, a C3 organization, which is an educational nonprofit, and Texas Normal, the C4, which is a political nonprofit. And this is the kind of diversification that helps take us to the next level to be able to maximize contributions and maximize our opportunities to get the word out and to get people involved. So thank you for your continued efforts. And of course, David Bass. He is, yes. I think that we all know and love David. He's with Texas Veterans for Medical Marijuana, has been a strong advocate at the Capitol and in his community, really leading by example on how to build relationships with lawmakers, how to tough it out when things are hard at the Capitol. We don't win them all, but we stay dedicated and we stay focused on moving the ball forward. And I'm just so grateful for your leadership with the veterans and with our movement in general. So thank you, Dave. Glad that you're here. Okay, so we're going to do the closing session, wrapping things up, final thoughts on the way that we move forward. We have 8 months until the pre-filing period begins for the next legislative session. 8 months seems like a long way away, but I tell you what, it is going to be here before we know it. And this event hopefully is a catalyst for these relationships that we have built for moving the ball forward and setting ourselves up for success. So I just wanted to so as we move forward, what are some plans that we have? What are some things going on? I want to talk to you, Jax, a little bit about the work that you've done and plan to do. You know, the Foundation for an Informed Texas did an outstanding job adapting to the pandemic, adapting by producing quality content because we weren't able to go to events. We weren't able to host trainings or meet and greets or seminars. But Jax was able to put together digital content and a whole catalog that helped people keep up to date and stay involved. So will you talk a little bit about that and some of the plans for moving forward toward the legislative session this year?
Sure. I mean, of course, we have quite a few items on our catalog that you can participate in, but one of the things that I'm most proud of is that we were able to put together a tutorial for patients on how you can enroll in the program and actually have a doctor walk them through what the process is like to have an appointment and get your prescription. And we've had thousands of people participating in that. And of course, after September 1st, there was such an appetite and we saw a huge influx of people in the program. So of course, we want to continue making sure that patients have this at no cost to be able to be enrolled in the program and figure out how to do it. Now with Texas Normal, my other nonprofit that I work with, we actually just put out the primary election voter guide. So that is, how do the legislators and the other candidates stand on the issue? And we also include their voting record in it. So you can look back over history and see how has it been. We're going to update that for the November election as well. So we'll have that available to you guys probably before early voting in October. Now, there are a lot of opportunities between now and the session to engage. And so we plan on working with people in the community to make sure that they're talking with their legislators and talking to the candidates of their choice. Now, of course, your legislator and your candidate of choice may not be the same person, and that is okay. You just have twice the work to do. So those are the things that I think it's really important that we focus on. We're also trying to work to put on another CME. You may recall last January, we put on a CME. It's continuing medical education credits, and every doctor needs to have a certain number of continuing education credits every year. And so we want to make sure that there's the opportunity for doctors to have that education and have it be on cannabis. Because, you know, as some of the doctors mentioned, I think Dr. Brimberry, that the patients sometimes know more than the doctors, right? Because we're so in love with this plant, we know all of the things. And so we want to empower the doctors to do that as well. And then when it comes time leading up to the session, working with our allies to make sure that we have a good strategic game plan, that we have legislation lined up to do the things that we want it to do. And then, of course, during the session, engaging with everyone, not only in person, but also digitally. I will say that's one thing that the pandemic has shown us is, of course, there's no substitute for meeting in person, but us having all this digital information available is really important for patients who can't travel, who might be homebound, who maybe there are people who don't have the monetary means to come and travel out to College Station, right? And we have things available for them online. So those are some of the really high level things that we're planning on focusing on. We're really hopeful that our veterans Puff and Putt benefit is going to be able to be rescheduled for sometime this fall. So stay tuned for that. That's out at Willie Nelson's golf course. For those of you who have not attended, you better attend this year. Okay.
Thank you. And so you're talking about advocacy, right? Connecting with lawmakers. And obviously we are in a Republican dominated state, and conservatives are increasingly coming on board with this issue. John, can you speak to the evolution of thought when it comes to some of your friends and colleagues on this issue, and maybe some tips for talking to folks that we may or may not agree with on everything?
Sure. Well, you're never going to agree with everyone on everything. So I think we just have to continue breaking down that stigma of talking about marijuana in public. I know for me personally, the first time, and we've heard it from some other panelists, the first time you get up, it may be a little bit nervous and confusing, but you have a great group of allies on this stage in this room that can help you out. Go to those meetings, help prepare your testimony. We're always here for resources for you. And I think we have seen a tremendous swing of the pendulum since 2013, 2015, and then now to where in the House, I mean, we have the House of Representatives pretty much on board with all of our objectives, from penalty reduction, enhancing our industrial hemp program, adding additional conditions to TCUP. And what we've seen there is incrementalism, while it's not preferred, isn't necessarily bad. So when we look at TCUP, for instance, Stephanie Click, who's kind of been the leader, through the governor's office for carrying that legislation each session, is in a runoff right now. So what happens if she loses? Who's going to be the new standard bearer and carry this TCUP program to the next level? And what does that next level look like? Dave has talked a lot about adding chronic pain as the next condition. So what's our laundry list and wish list, but what's our most critical goals? What do we want to push for the hardest? And then obviously in the Senate, where we face strong resistance, a lot of that resistance doesn't even necessarily come from the senators themselves. It comes from their fear of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. So we have to keep working on those senators. We have to keep visiting with them, educating them, and hoping that when they are in a closed door meeting with Lieutenant Governor, that they'll be brave enough to start sharing some of that insight and education with him as well. Dave, I think the best story I've ever heard of the Lieutenant Governor, when he met with him recently as a TCUP patient and thanked him. Politicians like to be glorified. They like to be patted on the back and told how awesome they are. And for Dave to say, thank you, as a veteran, this medicine is helping me improve my quality of life. That's so important. And the Lieutenant Governor put it in his newsletter. So any opportunities that we have like that, we've heard so many awesome stories today, just with the last panel with Lisa and Brennan. I know Stacy Fowler has an amazing story as well, and her dad tells it so well. Those are the types of things that are so impactful for the legislatures. It's very hard to look a father or a mother in the eye and tell them, sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. Or a veteran who Republicans, supposedly bend over backwards to proclaim their support for them. And they're saying this is a relatively harmless medication that can vastly improve my quality of life. How can you say no to that individual, that they can't at least try it? Or that the doctors can't have the power to at least add it to their arsenal. We always hear that law enforcement needs all these tools in their tool belt. Well, physicians need tools in their tool belt as well. And the legislature needs to get out of the business of trying to play doctor here. So.
Absolutely. And Dave, you have an event coming up that's going to be all about veterans and cannabis. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, on April 16th, we're so thrilled that in Killeen, Texas, right next door to Fort Hood, we will have our Texas Veterans Medical Cannabis Conference 2022. We have fantastic speakers lined up, including our ultra conservative Republican State House Representative Brad Buckley, who's going to come tell us why he supports a medical cannabis program in Texas, which is a big step forward. We have Dr. Wendy Askew. We have Dr. Brimberry. Jax will be speaking. We're going to have another veterans panel. It's going to be fantastic. It's free, family friendly. We want all the patients and veterans and everybody who supports veterans and patients to attend. It's going to be a wonderful event right there in the military town. I hope all of you can attend that. You're invited.
And we have the general election coming up, and we're going to have the Texas Normal Voter Guide, so we know where the candidates stand, how they voted. But Dave, you've done a really exceptional job of going to campaign events, talking with candidates, some of which are already in office, some are seeking office. Can you offer some pointers for those maybe going to a campaign event for the first time, how to engage?
Yes, when I joined Texas Normal in 2013 and became in 2012 and became an advocate, of course, I didn't know what to do. And so Cheyenne G. Weldon, Joshua Schimberg, Jax gave me guidance, very clear, specific guidance. And they told me, start with your state house representative. That's where you start. And so I went to the Capitol and went to Jimmy Don Aycock's office and found out right away, Jimmy Don Aycock, a conservative Republican legislator, did not want to hear the word marijuana in his office under any circumstances. And so Jimmy Don, I was the only person in the entire district that was up there advocating for cannabis reform. And so Jimmy Don would hide anytime he knew I was coming in the office, he would hide in his office and I would never get past the receptionist. If he was out in the hallway and he saw me coming, he'd duck down a side hallway. He was literally running from me throughout the Capitol. And all we were doing was trying to get support for the affirmative defense bill. That's it. That's all we were trying to do. And so I wouldn't give up. And then Scott Cosper took office and I made progress with Scott. Scott said, Dave, if you can get a decrim bill or a medical cannabis bill to the floor, then come talk to me. He said, I'm not opposed to either one of them. So that was a big step forward. And then Brad Buckley beat Scott in the Republican primary. And so I got a group of veterans together and we went and met with Brad, veterans from his district. And we had no idea where Brad stood on the issue. And so me and Jason Walker and April Martinez went and met with him, put on our nice clothes. And Brad sat there and listened to us. And then when we finished, Brad said, you know, one of my very best friends has been talking to me about medical cannabis because he has a very serious condition and he wants to use medical cannabis. And everything you guys just said is exactly what he's told me. He said, I support you. Count on me for my support. And he said, I want to tell you, you're doing this the right way, which was a great compliment. You know, we were dressed nice. We were talking professionally. We gave him a one-pager with the facts. And so that's how I approach it. And I worked on Dawn Buckingham for years. And then last session, and she called cannabis medicine snake oil. She said cannabis is snake oil. And then I met with her chief of staff 2 sessions ago, and he said, okay, Don supports this. We were talking about expanding teacup. He said, okay, Don's good. You're good with Don. He took the one pager. He said, don't worry about it. She'll vote to expand teacup. And then Don told John last session, I think it was, indicated that she's okay with decrim. And so, you know, it's hard, thankless work, but my advice to veterans, focus on your state house rep and then go over to the Senate side and start working on your Senate.
Anything either of y'all want to add to that before I ask if there are any questions?
I want to give a little bit of, I hate these stands. I'm just going to hold it. I want to give a little bit of context to where we're at. When I first became the political and legislative director for Texas Normal, my personal senator was Senator Charles Schwartner. And, you know, he is a orthopedist, no, Yes, he is, excuse me. So he is a doctor and he likes to talk about doctory things. And so I took some veterans into his office and we met with one of his staffers. And I remember the staffer looking at the veteran and just saying, well, you use this because you just want to be high though, right? And I just remember being so proud of that veteran for not going off on that. And now we're at a place where we have a super majority bipartisan support in the House. We have limited but present medical cannabis, and we have a lot of opportunity to move forward. So gone are the days of us being laughed at or pushed to the side and not taken seriously. Now, we may not be the top issue at the Capitol, but we cannot be ignored because we've had over 400 people on a Tuesday at the Capitol, dressed professionally, lobbying for cannabis law reform. So I just want to share my perspective of how far we've come, even though, as John says, it's incremental, and that's so frustrating. When you look at it in the history book type of way, we've done a lot together. And so thank you for everybody who has stuck it out and everybody who has joined the team, because we got to keep growing if we're going to keep expanding these changes in Texas.
Any questions? Keep the conversation going. These are the experts. These are the boots on the ground at the Capitol, every session, in and out. Yes, Judge Delaney.
This is going to sound like a dumb question, but a lot of people we run into are not very well informed. And I hear people say this: I can understand this medical thing, but why do you need the decrim thing, much less the full legalization thing? So I wonder what your elevator conversation would be with that person.
Can I take a first stab at that?
Yeah, I have.
So I think we've sort of figured out the model with the medical program, and it's go slow. And they want to be cautious. They've admitted that from the very beginning, that they want to be cautious rolling this out. You know, exactly like Jack said, they don't want people using it just to get high. They want to have the proven medical efficacy. And I think that we've done a great job bringing patients, bringing doctors, bringing other professionals in to the conversation to reinforce those points. You know, on the penalty reduction side, you have this idea from a lot of the members that marijuana is immoral. You can't be a professional. You can't be a good parent. You can't be an upstanding member of society if you use cannabis. And we all know that's not true. But maybe in their world, they don't see those types of professionals that are cannabis users. And maybe they do know them, but those people just keep it hidden from them. So I think we haven't quite figured out the model of, okay, we're going to accept giving limited amounts of cannabis to medical patients for these things, but we're still not okay, even though we don't necessarily agree that people that are caught possessing small amounts of marijuana should be in jail. We're still not totally okay with just turning the other cheek, you know, and saying this is just a slap on the wrist or lowering that fine. You know, Representative White, again, I'll go back, he literally laid out the blueprint for us last night. And what he alluded to, and something that the judge and I have talked about, is our current strategy has been 1 ounce or less to a civil penalty. That got amended 1 ounce or less to a Class C misdemeanor. And potentially, James White said, maybe you got to go a little bit lower than that. And so that's something that we really need to study, and we really need to get some insight into the Lieutenant Governor's leanings. You know, if we moved it to ½ an ounce, is that something that he would consider and support? Would that change some of the law enforcement agencies that have either been timidly supportive or neutral into being more favorable? We know in Harris County, where I live, there is over 100,000 case backlog of criminal cases that are just filling up the dockets. And how are they going to get through that when it's just more and more every day piling on top? Harris County, you may not know this, Houston, murder capital of the United States so far this year. Law enforcement officers, citizens are getting murdered in the middle of the day. It's really crazy to think about. I'm going to Mexico in a couple of weeks, and somebody's like, oh, Mexico's dangerous. I was like, Houston is dangerous. So we need to focus our law enforcement resources on keeping people safe and not focusing on the people whose behavior we may not agree with. And so again, it just goes back to that education, having those conversations, but really somehow digging into the inner workings of Lieutenant Dan Patrick's mind and figuring out what is going to be the thing that will get him to finally move on an incremental penalty reduction for possession of small amounts of marijuana. And hopefully, in a perfect world, we could kind of tie, even if we do have to move it to a half an ounce, if we could also include some limited amount of concentrates that also moves that to a misdemeanor from a felony, I think that's a huge win as well, because you're seeing the proliferation of vape cartridges and gummies and edibles. And I have friends and they're like, oh, this is like so much better because it doesn't stink. It doesn't stink up my car and I can use it here. I can use it there. And I was like, yeah, but did you know if you got busted with it, it's a felony? And they're like, what do you mean it's a felony? And so the average person may not know that. And it's a huge opportunity for us to have, maybe kill two birds with one stone, even though we know we're probably not going to get everything we want. And also personally, like for RAMP, we have made a decision consciously since 2013 and since to not really even talk about legalization in Texas, because we knew the legislature wasn't ready for it. But here we are, like almost 10 years later, and it's like, what are we doing? Like, it is time to talk about legalization and opening up an adult use market, allowing businesses to thrive, allowing adults to make decisions in their best interest. And so I think that is a conversation to have at the Capitol. I think our expectations maybe have to be lowered a little bit, to that penalty reduction. But we just got to keep going, got to keep the conversation rolling. And, thankfully the other states are falling like dominoes. So that chart that they had on the screen earlier showing all of the legalized states is fascinating. And that's going to be even more by the time we get to 2023. So it'll be a really exciting opportunity to see if any more conservative states sort of fall in line. What happens in Louisiana, what happens in Arkansas, what happens in Oklahoma, and then we will literally be surrounded. What happens in Mexico? Mexico, their Supreme Court declared prohibition unconstitutional. They haven't quite figured out like their regulatory framework yet, but we will literally be surrounded by legal adult use cannabis communities. And, we have to do something differently than what we're doing now.
And I would also say, Judge, that, you're asking, why does decrim matter? We've covered how limited our program is. It does not service all the Texas patients. And so these people who need this medicine, what are they? They're going to be criminals because they're not in the program, because they have to use illicit or legacy market items that may not be tested. And so that's one of the main reasons why decriminalization is important. It continues to protect patients who are not included in the program. Additionally, a lot of people in Texas don't like to talk about it, but there's a lot of racial disparity in the meting out of this law. In fact, marijuana in our statute is spelled marijuana with an H, because we didn't even learn how to spell it properly when we decided to outlaw it. So there's components to that can be addressed. Now, if we're talking about the legalization market, it's extremely important that people know that what they are purchasing has been tested and is safe for consumption. We don't always know that when we are purchasing these illicit market products. And in addition to that, something that I don't think it should be the reason, but a reason is that it would be great financial boon for us through a moderate tax revenue structure. It also would increase jobs by 20 to 40,000 jobs just in that industry. So I'll kind of piggyback off of something that Speaker, oh no, I'm forgetting his name. Yes, Phelan. Speaker Phelan said at a Texas Tribune event, he said that in his area, they were having to have people from Kansas and Georgia drive in to work on the oil refineries and other places out in Beaumont because they couldn't hire people because they either could not pass the THC drug test or they had a record that precluded them from working. So there's also a dramatic amount of collateral consequences that people who are arrested and ultimately convicted have to deal with. Now, let's say you're arrested and you're able to get deferred adjudication and it's not on your long-term record. You still had to pay thousands of dollars. You may have what's the saying? You may have skipped the ride, but you had to take the walk or something like that.
Beat the rap, not the ride.
There you go. Beat the rap, not the ride. And so, these are not all issues that the lieutenant governor cares about. So, I think John's more talking about, what would speak to the lieutenant governor, and that's extremely important because he's our pinch point. But when we're talking about these policies, it's extremely important that we talk about the different aspects that they touch on, even if it doesn't make everybody comfortable to talk about it.
So, Judge, when I talk about decrim to the legislators, I tell them when I retired from the Army, I did the Troops to Teachers program. I taught for 10 years at C.E. Ellison High School in Killeen. And during those years, several of my students were arrested for marijuana possession. And so I give the legislators the laundry list of the repercussions of that arrest for that 17 or 18-year-old student losing their driver's license previously, can't rent an apartment, can't get a job, going to have trouble getting a scholarship to college. And I give them that laundry list. And then I say, does this make sense? You know, that this kid got busted with a joint, and now these are all the things we're going to do to this student, and we've crippled this student before the student even started. And that's not right. And nobody can argue that that's just, and it works.
Yeah, one thing, just to highlight a point you made about the revenue, I was actually at an energy conference. So in my day job, I work for a software company. We have a lot of energy customers. And the Craig Goldman, the chair of the energy committee in the House, was talking about, there's a lot of talk about gambling and talk about tax revenue from marijuana policy. The state is going to be flush in cash when they come back for the next session. So he didn't really think that those were super effective talking points about a revenue perspective, because they're already going to have a lot of revenue. But it is one, and it is a tremendous amount. But, I think as a coalition and as a group, we need to decide what are our best talking points to putting forward an adult use program in Texas. But knowing that the revenue may not be as attractive this session because the state is much more flush in cash than it was going into the last session.
And I'm going to riff on this. The judge, we're answering all these questions you didn't even have. But Glenn Hagar, comptroller, right? He was talking another Texas Tribune event about, someone asked them about, the benefits, financial benefits. And he said that in Texas, it's kind of they don't really think that it's going to be a financial benefit until there's banking that has been addressed. That was one of his big concerns, is the banking, and making sure that that has been worked out. Now, of course, with hemp, we've seen directive letters put out to the State Banking Association on how to deal with hemp licensing and letting them know explicitly that's approved. But that was something that the comptroller mentioned. So these conversations, I think, are being had in many backroom conversations, but we have to figure out, as John said, what is going to be the best talking points that are going to serve the audience that we're talking to. And listen, the people of Texas, if we had a signature collection and could do a ballot initiative, we would have been done, right? We already 60% agree with legalization, astronomical support for decrim and medical. But the fact of the matter is that legislators lag behind greatly on this. And even in that instance, we have most of the legislators on our side. So who do we need? Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. That is where all of our peaceful warrior energy should be going, is towards him and moving him on this issue. Or his successor, that's right. We've got elections coming up in November, and let's see who wins. There can only be one.
Oh, Jax, this question, I guess, is for you more. I speak for a lot of people that aren't here and don't come to these things, and they may be in the legacy market because our teacup is managed by the state law enforcement agency. They don't want their names in that database. Nobody knows how this data is managed. Nobody knows where this data goes. And I'm wondering if Texas Normal or Ms. Fazio, if y'all know where this data goes from Department of Public Safety.
Well, I do know that DPS put out some information recently about how this information would not affect anyone's ability to get a concealed handgun license in the state of Texas. There's a lot of concern amongst patients about their Second Amendment rights. And so while that may not fix the 11E federal issue, it does help, people who already own guns feel comfortable about that. My understanding is that it is pretty confidential, the information kept within inside of DPS. I do not know of any other regulatory agency that it is shared with. Unless, do you know, Heather? I don't believe it is shared with anyone else. It's HIPAA compliant data management is my understanding. Is that right, Terrence? Yeah. There we go.
We can trust them, right?
Sure. It's on the internet. It's got to be safe, you guys. Dr. Balzenberger. And, you know, and that is because we don't have a card that we carry around here in Texas. There's not a medical patient card that you can flash at the officer and be like, no, that's fine. These gummies are totally not a felony. I'm cool. So they do have to look into that database. Now, the reason that my understanding is that one of the reasons that it was set up that way is because at the time, DPS was also managing other scheduled drugs through a system there where they were managing and making sure that you weren't doc shopping for certain types of pills. Now that program has now gone to the wayside and is now managed federally, but cannabis is still inside of that oversight, if that makes sense.
And Amanda has a question, but I'll just add that there's a meaningful conversation to be had about transferring this program to the Department of State Health Services, which would probably be better suited for managing a medical program.
Oh, doctors managing it?
Oh, like it's medicine. I have a really specific question, and this is something I've had conversations with both you, Jax, and you, Dave. But I get asked this question and I don't have a solid answer. So I am in my district, my state rep is 100% on board, total plant freedom. Easy, check that box. My senator, not so much. Life, just very long-term Republican, very conservative, Bob Hall. And he barely even makes eye contact with me when I have this conversation. And I would love some specific advice for people in that similar situation with probably their senator on how to advocate better.
Yeah, sure. The best thing you can do, and I don't know if he shares your political ideology or not, but regardless, typically you can find at least one policy thing that you agree with those individuals on. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you got to use the bait and switch tactic. So you go in for this particular policy issue and then you have a discussion on that. And hopefully it's something, you can find their policy issues on their website. Those are the ones that they're most passionate about. And there could be many pieces of legislation that are related to any one of those points. And so if one of those is important to you, that's a great intro to the meeting. And you don't want to be, too deceptive in those practices, but going in to talk about, the Second Amendment. And then you're like, by the way, I'm also an advocate for responsible marijuana policy. Can we talk about that? And they may say, nope, we can't. But hopefully they will, because you want to build that rapport. Just like if any of you are in sales, working with your customers, you want to try to build rapport with them. It's the same thing with the representatives in the center. You want to start cultivating that relationship. Sometimes you may have them running away from you in the halls, and there's not much you can do about that, honestly. And in that case, you can really try to work to get somebody new into that position. But Senator Hall, he's a very established politician. And I think your best option is try to build relationships where you have commonality, and then get him in a place where he's a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more comfortable talking about those, taboo issues, and just continue to bring that education. And, sometimes we're not going to get them from a no to a yes, but if we can get them from a no to an apathetic, that's sometimes a win. We have to take those hard no's away to get them to be soft no's or kind of in the middle, or even soft yeses, and then work with our allies who are more strong supporters to really have them be the leaders and try to bring the rest of them along as well. And another good thing is if you have a Republican in your Senate district or in your House district that's a friend of yours, or a Democrat, if you're of different ideology than those representatives, maybe have a friend that is similar go with you to those meetings. And then again, you're kind of creating that bond on your common interests and beliefs. And then you can bring up those more controversial issues in a more friendly setting.
And I mean, I'll say I would never have thought that Senator Schwartner, whose aide was the one who said to that veteran, you're just using this to get high. I would never have thought 7 years, 8 years later, whatever it was, that he would be the author for the medical bill in the Senate. And that he would actually be gently and perhaps not strongly enough pushing back on some of the lieutenant governor's requests for things to be cut. I never would have guessed that. So I think that we have to keep in mind that even though we may not see the change on the outside, it might be happening on the inside, and we don't know when that will manifest and show itself. So I know it feels like beating your head against, a pink granite wall, but just remember that one day he won't be the legislator there. We don't know when that is. So until then, we just keep doing our work.
Good point. Yeah.
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 Some of these legislators, we just have to accept they're never going to change their mind. I drove Jason Walker up to Waco. He got a meeting with Senator Birdwell, retired Lieutenant Colonel, hero of 911. He met with Jason, who's a career NCO. They had a fantastic meeting. The aide of Senator Birdwell used that meeting as the opportunity to confess to Senator Birdwell that she supports medical cannabis because of her family. And me and Jason drove home. We just thought, okay, we had a breakthrough with Senator Birdwell. Then he gets up on the Senate floor and says, I think these veterans just want to get high. So it's hard. It's not easy. And some of our legislators, we just have to wait them out till they're not there anymore.
I had a conversation with Senator Birdwell when I was the chairman of the Texas Young Republicans, and we were doing policy surveys. And he said he didn't have much time. And I was like, well, I'll just go straight to the point then, and we'll talk about cannabis. And he's like, oh, I don't support it all. And I was like, well, that's fine. We can kind of move on. And he's like, no, but I want to explain to you why. And he was in his office, got in his car, was driving on Bluetooth, and we talked for probably like 45 minutes. So even though he was like adamantly opposed, he wanted to share his perspective. And I think sometimes we need to listen, because while we might not turn that person from a no to a yes, some of their talking points, we can do the research, or we may already know the answers. And then we can use those when we hear them brought up in other arguments with other politicians. And that gives us an opportunity to maybe turn that person to a yes. So even if somebody is against you, but they want to have a conversation and tell you how awful
It's
you are,
reconnaissance.
yeah, exactly.
Yes. What about that medical freedom? Is it
Medical
just for them
freedom.
when they want to use it, or is it for all of us?
That's right. That's right. Okay, we are on track to end on time, 4 p.m. It has been such a great weekend. I appreciate y'all so much, the collaboration, the work together, everything that y'all do. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And as we think forward, be optimistic in the face of some short-term defeats. We are on the right track. History is on our side. Remember to be collaborative in nature, be kind, and we will continue working toward peace, toward justice, and toward liberty. Thanks, y'all. Yeah.